Not only is China's aviation industry one of the fastest growing in the world, it's also set to become the biggest domestic market over the next 2 decades. On top of that, they have also recently been designing and building aircraft in a bid to provide a competitor for Airbus and Boeing on the world stage. You probably know about the Comac C919, their narrow-body challenger, but today we are going to take a look at their newest offering to the market. But China's impact on the aviation industry doesn't stop there. It also covers new GPS systems and even hypersonic travel. So let's break it all down, shall we? Stay tuned. Let's start this video about Chinese aviation with a very brief history lesson, because it actually includes a quite cool, although maybe somewhat questionable story about the first recorded example of human flight. The story goes that back in 559 AD, Emperor Wen Xuan had a penchant for flying kites, but not just kites by themselves. He also allegedly made prisoners strap kites in the shape of owls to their backs and then had them leap off a really high tower. Now, the result was as grim as you might expect, except for one prisoner called Yuan Hangtao, who, according to the story, actually survived this ordeal. And not just survived, he allegedly flew an impressive 2.5 kilometers after the drop, making him possibly the first person to successfully fly a glider. Now, that's an impressive claim, but by no means China's only aviation-related success story. Instead, one of the biggest stories of recent times is the actual growth of aviation within China itself. Domestic tourism surged by 47.4% during the previous Lunar Year holidays, bolstering the local economy and putting the Chinese aviation sector on the path of becoming the biggest domestic aviation market by 2040 if it keeps growing at similar rates. Now, that's not really surprising given the size and population of the country, but China doesn't just have a huge aviation market. They're also trying to break into aircraft manufacturing. Which brings us to Comac, a Chinese aircraft manufacturer who is right now looking to take on the Airbus and Boeing duopoly. Their narrow-body aircraft, the C919, which I mentioned in the previous video, could pose a realistic threat to Airbus and Boeing. And that's not because it's so much better, but because it fits well into the market space of the 737 and Airbus A320, but represents a cheaper and, more importantly, a homegrown option. And that's in a market that is currently very important to the order books of both of those two incumbents. Now, there is much more to that story, which I'll get back to later, but the C919 is not the only thing that Comac is working on. There is also the C929, which is a wide-body aircraft seating between 250 to 320 people, which means that it's similar in size and market segment to the Airbus A330 or the Boeing 787 and possibly even the Airbus A350. Now, its development started back in 2011, and it quickly became a joint venture between Russia's United Aircraft Corporation, or UAC, and the Commercial Aircraft Corporation of China, Comac. This joint project was then called the CRAIC CR929, and the idea was to use it to create a replacement for the aging Ilyushin EL-96. The two partners would share the financial costs of the project, but they had slightly different roles, with much of the development taking place in Moscow, while Shanghai would serve as the eventual manufacturing base. As part of the initial development work, Comac and UAC approached many Western companies as potential suppliers for this aircraft, and they were initially also in talks with several Western engine manufacturers, whilst simultaneously developing their own power plant through Russia's United Engine Corporation and China's AECC. And certification for that homegrown engine was initially expected for around 2027 or so. But then the two partners had a quiet falling out, in part due to the sanctions levied on Russia after their rapid war escalation in Ukraine in 2022, which made potential partnership with Western suppliers quite uncertain, to say the least. So in 2023, Comac instead decided to continue development independently, and the design then became known simply as the C929. Now, in order to be competitive with the Airbus A330 and the Boeing 787, this jet will need power plants that can provide around 77,000 to 88,000 pounds of thrust. Rolls-Royce and General Electric already have engines in this class, and while we don't know for sure, Comac has very likely approached both of them for this project. But on the side, Comac has also been considering other options, and not just Chinese ones either. For example, some work had previously also been done with Russian engine manufacturer Vigatel, who is already working on the PD-35, a scaled-up version of the PD-14, planned for Russia's MC-21. That engine would provide 77,000 pounds of thrust, making it a good fit for the C929, but while it was originally set to enter service in 2025, the last we heard was that it's been delayed until at least 2029 at this point. Separately, there was also a project between China and the Ukrainian company Aviation Progress, but for different but obviously related reasons, both the Russian and the Ukrainian engine options now seems very unlikely. China have also been working independently on their own engine, the CJ2000, which is an upgraded, upsized version of the CJ1000, which was set to power the Comac C919 narrowbody aircraft. About a year ago, the CJ1000 was expected to get certified sometime in 2025, while the scaled-up CJ2000 only completed its first test runs in 2023, meaning a potential certification earliest around 2030. But like the C919, the C929 is most likely going to be powered by Western engines, at least initially. But just how big is that aircraft expected to become then? Well, the plans for the C929 include 3 different variants, with the -600 offering the mid-size configuration of 280 seats and a range of around 12,000 kilometers. If that's accurate, it would make the C929 comparable to the Boeing 787-9's 294 seats and 11,500 kilometer range, with other variants coming in slightly above and below in terms of passenger capacity. Now, so far, the only orders for this jet have come from its launch customer, Air China, and we don't yet really know how many aircraft this order is for. Now, if you watched my earlier video on the C919, you won't be surprised to hear that the C929 production will likely suffer from many of the same issues as that earlier aircraft have. And that's basically because it's not really as Chinese as it might seem. Whilst it's Chinese designed, only the body, meaning the bare airframe, can really claim to be Chinese built. The rest of the aircraft is not really Chinese at all, and as a rough guide, the airframe actually only makes up around 30% of the overall cost of a completed aircraft. So even significant savings in production costs on the plane itself likely won't make neither the C919 or the C929 as much cheaper to buy as customers might expect. And that's because the most expensive parts of the designs, like the engines, hydraulic systems and avionics, will have to be imported from the West, at least to start with. Now, China are also likely going to face the same problems that they did with the C919 when it comes to sourcing those components due to supply chain issues, and they might also face similar delays when it comes to certification in the US and in Europe. But this is something that they just have to overcome, because if Comac truly wants to rival Boeing and Airbus and become the third aircraft manufacturer, superpower on the world stage, then this is something that they will just have to overcome, because being able to sell their aircraft outside of China's own borders is definitely a must. Or is it? Well, before I answer that, I would like to thank today's sponsor, Odoo, because they make well-crafted and investigative videos like this possible. If you're an entrepreneur, or just someone who accidentally started a business after, driving your hobby too far like me, then Odoo is definitely the resource to turn to. With over 45 powerful apps, Odoo is an all-in-one business management software that makes running your company as easy as finding the middle seat on a budget airline, or maybe even easier. Let me show you their project app, for example, a real game changer for anyone managing projects big or small. It makes it super easy to keep track of progress, deadlines, budgets and resources, and you can organize your tasks using their Kanban view, which is like moving sticky notes around on a board, but way more satisfying. You can also break things down into smaller steps, set up recurring reminders for calls and meetings, and seamlessly sync all of it on your calendar to stay on track. Super slick. And when it comes to teamwork, Odoo makes collaboration effortless, since you can share updates, notes and files all in one place, keeping everyone on the same page. But the best part here is that Odoo grows with you. You start with one app, which is free forever, and then you can add more as your business expands. Unlimited hosting and support is of course included, which means that you always have the help that you need when you need it. So if you are ready to stop stressing and start thriving, check out the links here in the description below. Thank you so much, Odoo, and now let's continue. So remember how I mentioned that China's domestic market is set to soon become the world's biggest? Well, to understand just how big that market is, we have to consider its entire capacity. And by that I mean all of the flights in, out and within China. And as it turns out, the domestic market accounts for 91% of that capacity, leaving just 9% for international flights. But wide bodies are obviously used for longer routes, meaning fewer flights per day, so those aircraft actually account for way more than just 9% of China's total potential airline fleet. This means that in terms of China's future aircraft orders, these will of course be mostly single-aisle jets, but Boeing, Airbus and others are estimating that China's demand for wide bodies could be between 1,575 and 1,815 aircraft over the next 2 decades. That's a truly huge number to fulfill, and therefore also a huge prize for any aircraft manufacturer who can grab it. But before we get into that, let's focus on the domestic market for now, since that's clearly where Comac's threat to Airbus and Boeing is the biggest at the moment. That domestic hit could be huge for both of the existing players, but as it turns out, for Boeing in particular, because they have been getting a lot of orders from the major Chinese carriers historically. Orders who have now all but disappeared. Obviously, all of Boeing's problems with the 737 MAX groundings, the 787 production issues, the 737 and 777X certifications, supplier problems and even last year's strikes are hurting Boeing's orders everywhere, including in China. But it is worth remembering that the Chinese regulators were among the first ones to ground the MAX in 2019, and they were also among the last ones to unground the type. They were even halting new MAX deliveries after the type had been ungrounded. Last year, for example, deliveries of existing 737 MAX orders were slowed because of some, well, pretty strange reasons, like a review of the batteries of the newer 25-hour cockpit voice recorders, for example. And those deliveries then only restarted properly as late as in July of 2024. Since then, some new 737 MAX orders have actually been placed, including 50 by a major leasing company who also ordered some 80 Airbus aircraft on top of that. But are these Boeing issues really caused by the rise of Comac? Well, no, they're not. As we're recording this, fewer than 20 C919s have actually entered service, leaving plenty of space for Boeing and Airbus to fill. So there might actually be more political reasons behind those issues. So how does the order books currently look for Comac then? Well, the big three, Air China, China Southern and China Eastern, have slightly over 300 orders for the C919 between them at the moment. But to put that into context, Air China alone is currently operating 310 Airbus A320s and 737 aircraft, with another 75 narrowbodies on back order. China Southern has around 520 narrowbodies with a backlog of 193 aircraft, and China Eastern shows 515 Boeing 737s and Airbus A320s in service and another 210 on the way. So the Chinese domestic market growth still needs foreign jets, and the C919 has a long way to go before it can realistically begin to replace them. But of course, if Comac starts to get the production rate up, then there is a possibility that the China's government might start encouraging Comac orders internally. And the same could also be true for orders from other parts of the world where the Chinese government have some influence. But no matter what, China still faces one big obstacle to all of this, and that's their continued reliance on foreign components, mainly from the US and Europe. That's parts like the landing gear, avionics and other electronics, the weather radar, landing gear, hydraulics and actuators, all who are now currently coming from foreign suppliers. And at least for now, that also includes those CFM LEAP 1 Charlie engines that the C919 will definitely start off with. That means that Comac suffers from the same supplier shortages as Boeing and Airbus is currently doing. And on top of that, there is the reluctance of some foreign suppliers to even provide those components in the first place. You see, with China's history of reverse engineering supplied technology, that's meaning that some of these suppliers currently only offers older versions of these key components, holding back their more advanced products. That has followed several trials of individuals worldwide accused of spying on behalf of China's aviation industry. So, where does all of this leave the bigger C929 then? Well, the question here is if Comac will actually be able to repeat its recipe of starting with foreign parts and then gradually making it more Chinese. Because international politics could now make this much harder. I've already looked at Trump's return to the White House, and he has already been vocal on his plans regarding trade with China. This obviously goes both ways, so the likelihood of China selling their aircraft to American operators is likely not very high either, if those planned tariffs goes ahead, that is. China is also reliant on the US for things like semiconductors, and both of these parties are reliant on trade with each other to bolster their own economies. This is where we get into some geopolitics, because China's continued issues with Taiwan, their broader South China Sea dispute, their support of what the West sees as contentious countries, as well as rumors about cyber espionage are not making them many Western friends, especially not in the US. Now, I really don't want to get into a political debate here, but it is worth taking a quick look at how the situation across the Taiwan Strait has recently been affecting commercial aviation in much of Asia, beyond China's own aviation industry. The United States acknowledges the One China position, but have deep economic and geopolitical ties with the self-governing island of Taiwan, and their relationship with Taiwan is very different to that of China's main government. As recently as mid-December of 2024, China ran huge drills around the island. Now, aside from warships in the area, there was also significant airborne activity, including several military aircraft engaged in around 100 sorties in the area, as well as a bunch of balloons. These drills caused major disruption to Taiwanese airspace, where in October, some 153 military aircraft were detected in one single day. China also set up reserved airspace zones and tend to restrict airspace off their mainland coast, which can lead to disruptions for commercial traffic and result in what is basically a temporary air and sea blockade for Taiwan. Needless to say, this tension doesn't exactly encourage international trade, but for now it also seems to affect China's aviation sector in another way. And that's since it might be causing a downturn in international travel in and out of the country. Demand for travel into China is currently sitting at around 1/5 of what it was in 2019, meaning that it's not even close to pre-COVID levels. Statistics suggest somewhere around 21% fewer international flights took place in 2023 compared with 2019, but this was then somewhat bolstered by an increase of 15% on domestic routes. The result of this might be that the planned C929 could very well suffer if this geopolitical situation doesn't improve over the next few years. But here's the thing, none of this is slowing China's own expansion plans down. They plan to vastly continue their growth, something that doesn't just involve more planes, it also means more airports. Back in 2015, the Chinese government announced that they wanted to build 136 new airports by the year 2025. And they're now well on their way to meeting that figure, whilst simultaneously also upgrading and expanding many of their existing airports. Two of the biggest constructions right now are the new Dalian Jinzhou Bay Airport, as well as Guangzhou's second major airport, Fushan Gaoming. Then there's also Suzhou, a city of 10 million people which currently has no airport, so they're building one there as well. China's civil aviation traffic is believed to have exceeded 700 million passengers in 2024, with 930 million projected for 2027. And there is actually potential for even more growth, since China's population still flies much less than their peers in the US and Europe. On top of all of this, China are also focusing on building brand new infrastructure and aviation systems like Beidou, which is their own next generation satellite navigation system. A version of the system is already in use and is said to be accurate enough to already outperform GPS for several regions in the world. For example, GPS is accurate to 4.9 meters and Beidou currently claims an accuracy of down to 1 meter. Because of this, it's already used by some major shipping companies and could easily become a popular option in aviation too. But while this system gives another option, it's unlikely to provide a solution to the GPS interference issues that I've covered in my recent videos. So as you can see, China is engaged in a lot of different things, from manufacturing to design and last but not least, innovation. Recent media reports making fantastic claims like China develops aircraft engines set to revolutionize commercial air travel started surfacing around August back in 2024. And in those reports, a group of Chinese engineers claimed to have invented a new and very powerful engine which could enable not just supersonic but hypersonic flights. And what's hypersonic flight, you might ask? Well, it's fast, generally referring to speeds above Mach 5, meaning 5 times the speed of sound or even faster. And if this engine lives up to the hype, then it will be capable of achieving speeds apparently 10 times that of the Concorde, meaning around 16 times the speed of sound, or a London to New York flight time of about 17 minutes. Now, I would take those reports with a huge grain of salt. Every report that we've found online so far claims a different top speed with this engine, with some painting out a possible speed of twice that of the Concorde, another claiming Mach 4 or 5, all of those more believable than those Mach 16 numbers that I said before, but also still a little bit hard to believe in, because other designers like Boom Supersonic and NASA are still only looking at the supersonic range and not hypersonic. But what would be the science behind this new engine then? Well, the engineers claim that it works in 2 different modes. Below Mach 7, it functions as a continuously rotating detonation engine where fuel mixes with air, ignites, and then creates a shock wave that propagates through an annular chamber. Above Mach 7, the shock wave then stops rotating and becomes focused on a circular platform at the rear of the engine, and this then creates a nearly straight line oblique detonation format. Now, if this sounds a little bit hard to understand, don't worry, you'd basically have to be a rocket scientist to know what's going on, and trust me, I definitely don't. But even if this engine would be able to work in the ways that is claimed in these reports, I have some questions regarding the materials needed in order to build a craft capable of sustaining the sheer friction heating at those speeds. But maybe that's just me. Regardless of the rumored top speeds of the Beijing Liaoyong Jiangxing technology aircraft concept, sorry if I butchered that, the fact is that China's aviation industry and the innovation of new aviation technology that comes with it seems to be absolutely booming at the moment. Currently, the Chinese aviation industry has an average yearly growth of 10.5%, and it surpassed the US in terms of passenger numbers back in 2019. Through 2023, their narrow-body and wide-body fleets grew by 18% and 26% respectively, and are set to carry on in similar rates unless something unexpected happens. This means that China is, without a doubt, a growing aviation powerhouse, and one that both Airbus and Boeing, as well as foreign investors and the rest of the aviation world, is keeping a close eye on, maybe with a slight ting of worry. But what do you think? Was there something else that you would like me to cover? Let me know in the comments here below. Remember that you can also support my videos by supporting my sponsor, which you can also find in the description below the video, and you can join my Patreon crew if you want to take part in my next Zoom hangout or watch my videos before anyone else. My name is Peter Hörnfeldt, you are watching Mentour now, have an absolutely fantastic day, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.